Hello, my name is Ezengwa Ongben, and the topic of this discussion is how to cure type 2 diabetes naturally. In the modern times, diabetes is a major health concern. Over the past 50 years, there has been a 700% increase in its incidence. In developed countries, it's the fifth leading cause of death, and in developing countries, it's also a disease of epidemic proportions. So what is diabetes? Well, diabetes is not one condition. There are actually three recognized forms of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes. Now, before I go into the differences in each form, it's also useful to recognize what they have in common. In all forms of diabetes, there is a chronically elevated level of blood sugar, also called chronic hyperglycemia. And there is also faulty insulin signaling. And it's useful to recognize that diabetes is not so much a disease of high blood sugar, because high blood sugar is merely a symptom. The root cause is faulty insulin signaling. Now, in each form, the defect in insulin signaling varies. Let's examine this. In type 1 diabetes, the basic problem is an autoimmune reaction. And by an autoimmune reaction, I mean where the immune system attacks the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. In the pancreas, there are beta cells, and they produce and secrete insulin. But certain cells of the immune system, such as cytotoxic T cells, target and destroy these insulin-producing cells. And that is why type 1 diabetes is also called insulin-dependent diabetes, because there is a dependency on external sources of insulin, because the body can no longer produce its own insulin. A recognized cause of type 1 diabetes is a vitamin D deficiency in childhood, because vitamin D plays a very important role in regulating immune function. And clearly, in type 1 diabetes, there is a derangement in immune function. And type 1 diabetes is also called juvenile onset diabetes, because this typically occurs in childhood or adolescence. Now, with type 2 diabetes, the basic problem is not with the production of insulin. Actually, in many cases, there is elevated levels of insulin, abnormally high levels of insulin. So the pancreas is producing and secreting insulin normally, but the problem is that the target cells are no longer responding to insulin. There is a loss of sensitivity to the action of insulin. There is what they call insulin resistance. And that insulin resistance is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes. And about 90 to 95% of diabetes cases are type 2 diabetes, and the hallmark is insulin resistance. In gestational diabetes, this typically occurs during the second trimester of pregnancy. And there's also a development of insulin resistance. But in this case, the cause is different. Insulin resistance in gestational diabetes proceeds from pregnancy-related hormones. Because during pregnancy, there are elevated levels of various types of hormones. There are elevated levels of estrogen, progesterone, human placental lactogen, prolactin, cortisol, and other hormones. And it's the interaction of all these hormones and insulin that generates this insulin resistance in gestational diabetes. So in this talk, I'm going to concentrate on type 2 diabetes. So before I go into how to cure diabetes, it's important to recognize or to know a little bit about the operation of insulin in the body and how insulin resistance develops in the first place. So this is a human torso, and the torso is divided by a diaphragm, a muscular wall. Right below the diaphragm we have the liver. Right behind the stomach we have the pancreas. Then I'm going to draw another very important target tissue of insulin, which is skeletal muscle, and then fat cells and the brain. So I'm going to just draw the key players in the action of insulin in the body. So we have the pancreas, we have fat cells, have the brain, have the liver, and then skeletal muscles. So when we eat a meal, our body breaks down the nutrients in that food, and the nutrients are absorbed and released into the bloodstream. And the pancreas monitors the level of sugar in our blood. And after we eat a meal, the level of blood sugar rises. And in response to that rise of blood sugar, the pancreas secretes insulin into circulation. And insulin travels all around the body and communicates to many cells in the body. Now, I've only highlighted the key target tissues of insulin. So insulin communicates to the skeletal muscles to absorb blood sugar and to either store that sugar in the form of glycogen or to burn that sugar and generate energy. It also communicates to fat cells, wherein fat cells take up that blood sugar and store it in the form of fat. Insulin also communicates to the liver, where the liver can also store that sugar in the form of glycogen. And insulin also communicates to the liver to stop producing sugar, because the liver is able to produce sugar from other nutrients, like from the breakdown products of proteins and from the breakdown products of fat. The liver is able to convert those nutrients into sugar in a process called gluconeogenesis. Now, insulin signals to the liver there is sugar available, so there's no need to produce more sugar from these other substrates. Insulin also communicates to the brain. It tells the brain that there is now nutrients in the body, and the brain now suppresses appetite, and the brain also increases energy consumption in the body due to the availability of food, and there's more energy available in the body. So this is roughly the effect of insulin in normal physiology. Insulin has many roles, but it's a very important role that it has is that it signals to many tissues in the body to take up nutrients, not only sugar, but also to take up amino acids, to take up fatty acids, just to take up the nutrients in food, both vitamins and minerals. But in this talk, I'll just focus primarily on the relationship between insulin and blood glucose. So insulin communicates to the cells of the body to take in blood sugar. So how does insulin resistance arise? Well, we can get a clue from the rapid rise in type 2 diabetes in the modern time. And it tallies with the evolution of our diet, because in modern times we eat a highly processed food diet. We eat a lot of refined carbohydrates, we eat a lot of vegetable oils, and also modified vegetable oils like trans fats, also called partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. So under normal conditions, over the course of the day, insulin levels rise and fall in a kind of curvature like this. And after we eat a meal, let's say this is breakfast, there is a rise in insulin due to the higher nutrients, and then there's the normal fluctuation. When we eat another meal, there's a rise in insulin and the normal fluctuations. But a very important thing to recognize is that the amount of insulin that is secreted also tallies with the rate at which the sugar in food is released into the bloodstream. So for example, if we take a soft drink, which is part of this highly processed food diet I'm talking about, a bottle of soft drink contains about between 7 and 9 teaspoons of sugar. And within 30 minutes, most of those teaspoons of sugar have been released into the bloodstream. So there is a surge, there is a massive release of blood sugar. And that massive release of blood sugar also causes a massive release in insulin, because the body wants to tightly regulate blood sugar for various reasons. So there is an abnormally high level of insulin released when we consume these refined carbohydrates. If, let's say, we had consumed something like beans, which is a legume. Now, beans also contains carbohydrates, but those carbohydrates are mixed up with fibers, with proteins, with fatty acids, with vitamins, with minerals, things that slow down digestion. So the release of sugar into the bloodstream is much slower, and therefore the peak level of insulin falls within a normal range. So I'll draw an arbitrary line, and I'll call this range the range of normality in insulin release. This is normal physiology. Now, when we take, let's say, a bottle of a soft drink, that surge of sugar that is released into the bloodstream causes an abnormal rise in insulin. There is a peak. And it's not only with a soft drink, with many types of refined carbohydrates. So when you have like white flour products, such as pasta or certain pastries or cookies, crackers, those types of food, any food with refined carbohydrates, it causes this burst of insulin. Now, over time, when these refined carbohydrates are a regular part of the diet, when we consume them on a day-to-day basis for many years, and there are these peaks of insulin various times in the day, this abnormally high levels of insulin, something starts to happen in the cells of the body. Because the body responds to this very high level of insulin by essentially tuning out the signaling effect of insulin. It loses sensitivity to insulin. So a useful analogy would be, let's say you stay in a room and that room is filled with a lot of dirty laundry, and the room is very unkempt, there is decomposing food in that room, then you know that that room will have a very smelly odor. Now, if I live in that room and I stay there day to day and I don't leave, very soon I will become insensitive to the offensive odors in that room. And if somebody else steps into that room, the person will be like, wow, this room really stinks. But I'll be like, what? I don't notice anything. So that's kind of like what the body does with the chronically high levels of insulin. Because when we eat refined carbohydrates on a daily basis, we drink soft drinks, we eat all these pastries, we eat white bread, all these white flour products, every time we eat it, there's a burst of insulin, burst of insulin, burst of insulin. So the body gets used to these abnormally high levels of insulin. So this is just a cell in the body, and on the cell there are insulin receptors. and it's the union of the insulin molecule and this insulin receptor that now communicates a signal that now causes the cell to take up the nutrients. But when there are these abnormal levels of insulin over several weeks, over several months, over several years, what the cells of the body do is that they reduce the number of insulin receptors that they have, because they're trying to tune out the too much noise that these insulin molecules are making in their environment. So instead of having set amount of insulin receptors, they essentially downregulate their insulin receptors, and they essentially become deaf to the message that insulin seeks to communicate, just due to the abnormally high levels of insulin. So that is essentially what occurs in type 2 diabetes. And we can see that as our diet has transitioned to a lot of refined carbohydrates, a lot of vegetable oils and trans fats. Well, vegetable oils and trans fats contribute to insulin resistance, but it's through a different mechanism. But I won't go into that in this talk. But this our transition to a highly processed food diet, a lot of fried foods, a lot of packaged foods, and the abnormalities, the abnormally high levels of insulin that it triggers is what drives this insulin resistance and is at the heart of the type 2 diabetes epidemic. So now that we've understood the cause, it gives us insight into the solution, because clearly it's not just a matter of reducing blood sugar. If I took a medication simply to reduce blood sugar and I don't address this issue with insulin signaling or insulin resistance, then I'm not going to have a good result. I would only be able to manage the condition. But to be able to cure type 2 diabetes, I have to be able to resolve the issue of insulin resistance. I have to be able to sensitize the body once again to insulin. So the cure for type 2 diabetes is to sensitize the body to insulin once again, so that insulin can serve its function, so that cells in the body can absorb glucose out of circulation and reduce blood glucose, so that the liver will stop producing additional sugar through gluconeogenesis. It will be able to hear the message of insulin and stop producing additional sugar. There's something I want you to notice, and it also gives us insight into the critical role of the liver in type 2 diabetes. If one has type 2 diabetes and you don't eat any carbohydrates, because carbohydrates break down into sugar, you totally eliminate carbohydrates from your diet, and in the morning you check your blood sugar, you will notice that you still have high blood sugar. Where did that sugar come from? Well, that sugar came from your liver, and your liver converted the fat in your food and the protein in your food into sugar through gluconeogenesis. That's why it's very, very important to resolve the issue of insulin signaling, because once the liver becomes sensitive again to insulin, it will stop producing that sugar. And getting the liver to stop producing that sugar is the key in curing type 2 diabetes. So what are some things that one could do to resensitize the body to insulin? Well, the most important thing is to get rid of the offensive foods. That is, the highly processed foods that are the primary drivers of this type 2 diabetes epidemic. So we need to eliminate refined carbohydrates. That is, foods that contain table sugar, foods that contain high fructose corn syrup, foods that contain white flour. And we have to substitute those refined carbohydrates with whole grains. Instead of white flour, we can eat whole wheat. Instead of sugar and high fructose corn syrup, we can eat whole fruits that combine both fiber and vitamins and minerals, and that contain other useful nutrients for the body. So it's hugely important that we eliminate refined carbohydrates. In addition to eliminating refined carbohydrates, we also have to reduce intake of vegetable oils, your soybean oil, your corn oil, your canola oil. That is fried foods. You have to avoid fried foods, because fried foods contribute to insulin resistance, but it's through a different mechanism, which unfortunately I did not go through in this talk. You avoid fried foods. Thirdly, you avoid trans fats, that is partially hydrogenated vegetable oils. And trans fats are used in almost all packaged foods. In any packaged food, when you see vegetable oil, it's typically a code for partially hydrogenated vegetable oil. Because the problem is that vegetable oil goes rancid very quickly. And for a packaged food to have shelf life that will last several months or even several years, you can't use natural vegetable oil. You have to hydrogenate that vegetable oil, and that generates trans fats. And trans fats are a major, major, major driver of insulin resistance and ultimately of type 2 diabetes. So eliminate refined carbohydrates, avoid fried foods, avoid trans fats. So these are basically the things to avoid. Now, there are also many other important things to do. Exercise is very, very important, because exercise increases blood flow to your various skeletal muscles. And your skeletal muscles are a very, very important reservoir for absorbing excess glucose. And when we exercise, we increase blood flow. And that increased blood flow resensitizes the muscles. So you now have that reservoir for excess blood sugar that you didn't have before. So that will also help to reduce chronically high blood sugar levels. And the exercise does not need to be so strenuous and for multiple hours. A 30-minute walk every day will go a long way. Over time, the increased blood flow will improve the insulin sensitivity of your skeletal muscles, which will help to reduce blood sugar. So exercise is hugely important. In addition, it's very useful to consume raw vegetable juice, such as the juice of green leafy vegetables like spinach and kale with tomato. You can add some cabbage, you can add carrots, you can add ginger, add garlic, just a mix, and you can be creative. Raw vegetable juices. And the reason why is that vegetables are a great source of phytonutrients, and phytonutrients are a diverse class of molecules, and it has been found that many of these types of phytonutrients help to resensitize the body to the effects of insulin. So they help to reverse the insulin resistance. So raw vegetable juice is a very, very useful intervention. And in that vein, it's also very useful to regularly drink lime water, because lime water is a great source of magnesium, and it's been found that magnesium deficiency is a major driver in insulin resistance. And when you think about it, a highly processed food diet with a lot of refined carbohydrates, with a lot of fried foods, a lot of packaged foods, those types of foods are very nutrient poor in terms of minerals and vitamins. So when those types of processed foods are your staple diet, you end up with a lot of mineral and vitamin deficiencies. And magnesium is hugely important for the action of insulin in the body. So lime water is very, very good. You can squeeze the juice of one lime into a glass of water, and you can drink like 2 cups a day, maybe one in the morning and one in the evening, and you get a great source of vitamin C, of magnesium, of calcium, and other beneficial phytonutrients. So in addition to what I've mentioned here, another useful therapy to resensitize the body to the effects of insulin is to raise core body temperature. So visiting a sauna is a great idea. Or spending time just in a bath filled with warm water. Maybe the temperature of the water is between 40 degrees Celsius. And you just sit in that hot water for 30 minutes. You warm the body up and you sweat profusely. So sitting in a sauna or a hot water bath is also a very useful treatment in resensitizing the body to the effects of insulin, a sauna or a hot water bath. So essentially, the cure to type 2 diabetes is not one thing. There's no silver bullet, and it's not something that you would just say, okay, this supplement will solve all your problems in a week. Unfortunately, that is not the case. It requires the disciplined application of certain principles. You have to take out highly processed foods out of the diet, and then you have to replace them with nutrient-dense plant foods. You have to eat more whole grains, more legumes, and also animal products are also very good, but preferably organic animal products that are not tainted with pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, and other sorts of medications. And something like poultry eggs are very good because they're a good source of vitamin D and also healthy cholesterol. So like boiled eggs is very good. So it's about avoiding, essentially the standard modern diet, which is highly processed food. You have to avoid a lot of that and eat more healthier foods, and then increase exercise, and then there are other useful interventions like raw vegetable juice. If you can drink that on a daily basis, just some spinach, garlic, ginger, tomatoes, carrots, just a variety, and you can mix and match, because essentially all vegetables are good sources of these health-promoting phytonutrients. Lime water is also a very good supplement to utilize on that road back to recovery. And saunas and hot water baths are useful. Exercise is very good. And the important thing to recognize is that the solution is not of one day. It's a gradual journey that will take several months, and it will require a change in lifestyle, because it's a lifestyle that created the condition of type 2 diabetes, and it's the recreation of your lifestyle, the alteration of your lifestyle, that is ultimately the cure. I hope you found this talk useful. Thank you so much for your time.